In Igbo dynasty, kings are born, not made. And Igu, a young prince from royal blood, carried the weight of his ancestors on his shoulders. Still in the prime of his youth, he stood for his people, facing the greatest challenge of his life. Mysterious deaths ravaged his land, leaving fear in every heart. But Igu, driven by courage and duty, embarked on a deadly mission to the land of the dead, a place no living soul had dared to tread. He alone would defy the unknown, determined to save his people from the grip of sudden death. This is his story.
In the ancient and remote Igbo kingdom of Amazu, a chilling mystery gripped the village. People began to die suddenly, without warning or explanation. What was even more terrifying was that these deaths were not limited to those within the village but extended to Amazu's sons and daughters who had traveled to foreign lands seeking better fortunes. Fear descended like a heavy cloud, suffocating the village as no one knew who would be next. It seemed as though an unseen force was targeting the people of Amazu. In the faraway town of Onitsha, where he was busy trading, Igu, a young man from the royal family of Amazu, was haunted by the news. His heart pounded with worry every time he heard of another death back home. He felt the icy grip of fear in his chest and knew he could not sit idly by. Igu was determined to find the cause of these sudden deaths, no matter the cost. The young man began to confide in his close friends, explaining the dread that had taken hold of their kingdom. One of Igu's friends, Udoka, was moved by Igu's predicament. He decided to help by taking him to his father in Oka to see if his aged father Ichi Okonko could proffer solution. This journey took them almost a day trekking from Onitsha to Oka. Udoka led Igu through a narrow winding path surrounded by tall grasses and palm trees swaying in the wind. The path was uneven, with stones and small bushes lining the way. When they arrived at Udoka's father's house, it was a small compound with 3 mud huts, their thatched roofs held up by wooden pillars. A low fence of dried bamboo surrounded the house, and a clay pot of water stood near the entrance. The air was still, and the night felt calm as they approached Ichi Okonko's humble home. Udoka's father Ichi Okonko, a wise elder with deep knowledge of the old ways, was sitting at the entrance of his compound as it was sunset. He welcomed them into his home, offered them white nsu, kola nut and palm wine, as they chewed and drank the palm wine. Udoka introduced his friend Igu to his father, urging him to explain to his father why they came to see him. Igu greeted Ichi again, bowing down, then narrated what brought them to him. Ichi Okonko listened intently but remained skeptical. He wanted to be sure Igu was truly committed to uncovering the mystery. When Igu nodded firmly, vowing to pay any price for the solution, Ichi Okonko told him to go and sleep over it for 2 days, then come back and tell him if he was truly ready. They decided to stay back instead of going back to Onitsha and returning back after 2 days. 2 days later, Igu told Udoka's father that his mind was made up already. Ichi Okonko decided to help. Ichi Okonko instructed Igu to gather several items: freshly sprouted palm fronds, 2 pieces of kola nut, a keg of palm wine, white nzu clay, 2 ogirishi leaves, 4 pieces of iroko tree bark, and 4 eggs. Then come back any day it rained on Eke market day, so that he would rest in his home on the Ori market day while they set out for the journey on the Afo market day. Igu and his friend Udoka went back to Onitsha. Igu, being so determined, did not hesitate to gather those items at Ose Market Onitsha, where such items were readily available. 2 Eke market days passed, there was no rain, but on the early hours of the 3rd Eke market, there was a heavy downpour. Igu, who has been ever ready, rushed and informed his friend Udoka for their movement. Udoka quickly prepared and they left again for Oka that very day, without delay as agreed before. They reached Oka later that day. Ichi Okonko welcomed them as usual. Igu presented those items to Ichie, who examined them and saw they were complete. He rested throughout the next day being Ori. On the night of the Afo market day, Igu and Ichie Okonkwo set out under the cover of darkness, carrying a small oil lamp to light their path. Igu had gathered the items required for the journey: freshly sprouted palm fronds, 2 pieces of kola nut, a keg of palm wine, white nzu clay, 2 ogirishi leaves, 4 pieces of iroko tree bark, and 4 eggs. After walking for hours, they crossed 7 rivers, each crossing requiring a moment of silence and reflection. When they reached a location that Ichie Okonkwo called the boundary between the world of the living and the dead, the real work began. The 80-year-old elder, Okonkwo, stood beside the 25-year-old young man, Igu, gazing out at the vast, open ground. The sun beat down upon them, casting long shadows across the grassy expanse. "Here, my son," Okonkwo said, his voice low and wise, "we stand at the threshold." Igu's eyes locked onto the Ichias, filled with anticipation. "The land of the dead?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Okonkwo nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Where the veil between worlds is thin." First, Ichie Okonkwo and Igu rubbed the white nzu clay around their eyes to allow them to see beyond the veil of life and into the spirit world. Next, they drank a portion of the palm wine and sprayed the rest into the air, glicking it toward the sky to invite the ancestors' presence. Ichie Okonkwo then broke the kola nuts into 4 pieces, each one dropped at the 4 cardinal points: north, south, east, and west, signifying their alignment with the forces of the universe. The iroko tree bark was scattered at their feet to protect them from the spirits of the dead, who could become hostile if the living did not follow proper protocol. Ichie Okonkwo poured some wine on the ground for libation, speaking ancient incantations in the language of their ancestors. The words called on the spirits to grant them safe passage. With the ogirishi leaves held horizontally between their lips, they were forbidden from speaking during the crossing, as speaking could attract unwanted spirits. They both grasped the yellow palm fronds in their hands, a symbol of purity and protection. Finally, with a gentle motion, Okonkwo lifted the Oba local plate. He opened it, revealing 4 unblemished eggs. "These eggs represent life," Okonkwo explained, "and the boundary we are about to cross." Igu watched, transfixed, as Ichie Okonkwo carefully lifted the egg and smashed it onto the ground. The sound echoed through the stillness, like the crack of thunder on a distant horizon. As the egg shattered, a faint tremor ran through the earth. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. Igu felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. "What's happening?" he asked, fear creeping into his voice. Okonkwo's eyes gleamed with ancient knowledge. The doorway opens. Before them, the ground began to shift, revealing a hidden path. A valley unfolded, like a wound in the earth's skin. A small hilly path appeared, leading down into the land of the dead. "Follow me, Igu," Okonkwo said, his voice steady. "We walk among the ancestors now." With a deep breath, Igu stepped forward, down into the unknown. Night became day as they descended into this mysterious realm, where the air was thick and still, and the landscape was like nothing Igu had ever seen. As they entered the land of the dead, the ground sealed itself behind them, leaving no way back except through the same sacred rituals. The world they stepped into was eerie and timeless, bathed in a dim, otherworldly glow. Shadows of spirits flickered at the edge of Igu's vision, shapeless and silent, but filled with malice. Ichie Okonkwo, who waited under a big tree shade, instructed Igu to continue his journey alone from this point. He warned him not to look back or respond to any voice that called out to him, for spirits could deceive and lead him astray. Igu was to walk until he met an elderly, gray-haired man who would call his name. Only then would he know he had found the ancestor he sought. With the yellow palm frond still in hand and the ogreishi leaf between his lips, Igu walked forward. The spirits that haunted this place were many. Some took on the form of grotesque, shapeless ogres with no discernible features but eyes that glowed with hunger. They lunged at Igu, hoping to draw him into their world, but Igu kept his gaze fixed ahead and his heart steady. His silence and resolve protected him. Along the way, Igu saw the faces of many Amazu kinsmen who had died, some he knew, others he did not. Some were family members who had passed in his lifetime, while others were long-dead ancestors. They whispered among themselves, muttering in surprise and disbelief that a living man could be walking among them. But they recognized him as someone on a mission, untouched by death's grip. After what felt like an eternity, Igu came upon a figure who stood out from the rest. It was an old man with a long white beard that nearly reached the ground. His face was creased with wisdom and age. When the man saw Igu, he called out in a booming voice,
Igu! Igu!
Meaning, Igu, what brings a boy like you to this place? At last, Igu knew he had found his great-great-great-grandfather Ichi Ogeli. He removed the ogreishi leaf from his mouth and dropped the palm fronds to the ground. Prostrating himself before the old man, he greeted him with reverence and explained why he had come. Meanwhile, back where Ichi Okonkwo was waiting, many unimaginable spirits were crossing to the land of the living and many coming from the land of the living, which might be souls that just died and left the world of the living. Others were hovering around in form of different shapeless creatures, all tend to frighten Ichi, but because he was an elderly who had seen it all in life and also because he observed the right protocol before he entered. With continuous utterances of incantations and slapping the palm fronds on the ground, those spirits ended up greeting and passing him. The elder sighed deeply and shook his head. Nana Ogele, Igu's ancestor, held his hand and led him through a narrow path into a hut. He began. Igu, my son, he said, you are a brave and true descendant of the Ogele dynasty. With a grave expression, the elder revealed that the sudden deaths were not mere accidents. The ancestor reveals the cause of the deaths plaguing Amazon, a curse brought on by the people's greed and intimidation of others, taking of rights that do not belong to them. The old man revealed that the ancestors were angered. Igu humbly asked for the solution to stop the death. The ancestor proclaimed, to stop the curse, they must make a great sacrifice. 1. To stop the cause of sickness, they needed to sacrifice 11 live rabbits, caught not in traps but by hand, and have 11 virgins kill and prepare the rabbits for all the villagers to eat together at the square. The virgins shall never taste it even as they prepare the meal. 2. Then for sudden death they shall gather the heart of a leopard, agu, white feather of an eagle, and the blood of an innocent child. All would be buried at the square and then oath be taken that they must cease taking what was not rightfully theirs. Only then would the death stop, and long life return to the kingdom of Amazon. After revealing the cause of the curse and instructing Igu on the sacrifices that needed to be made, the old man gave Igu his blessing. He purified him, anointing him with the wisdom of the ancestors, and proclaimed that Igu would one day be the king of Amazu. With his task complete, the elder, Nana Ogele, Igu's ancestor, together with other ancestors, guided Igu back to the path leading to the land of the living. When Igu returned to the spot where Ichi Okonkwo waited beneath the giant tree, they repeated the sacred rituals that would allow them to return to the world of the living. They once again rubbed white Nzu clay around their eyes, drank palm wine, and performed the same offerings as before. They held the ogreishi leaves in their mouths and gripped the palm fronds tightly in their hands. As Ichi Okonkwo chanted the final incantations, the earth opened once more, and they climbed the hilly path back to the world of the living. When they reached home, they found out it was the morning of the 4th Afo market day since they had left. Meaning they had spent more than 2 weeks in the land of the dead, even though it felt like mere days to them. Upon their return, Igu thanked Ichi Okonkwo with a large cow and a goat, offering them as a gesture of gratitude. Igu then made the journey back to Amazu. He met the elders of the land at their palace and narrated his dangerous adventure. His story was met with awe and celebration. As news of his bravery spread, the villagers carried him on their shoulders, dancing and singing in joy. The entire kingdom celebrated his safe return, though only the elders were aware on the task ahead at that moment. However, the joy is mixed with concern, as soon as the people of Amazu realized they must now fulfill the difficult sacrifices that the ancestors demanded. The relief felt by the villagers and the weight of the task ahead. The people of Amazu were faced with the challenge of fulfilling the sacrifices needed to lift the curse. The blood of an innocent child, heart of a leopard, and the feather of an eagle seemed impossible to obtain. The kingdom's greatest hunters set out into the wilderness to track down a leopard. One fateful morning after 3 market days, in the deep forest, Mazimba, one of Amazu's most skilled hunters, found a leopard caught in his trap. The leopard, fierce and enraged, fought against the trap, tearing at the trees and bushes around it. As Mazimba keenly approached, the leopard lunged at him, claws outstretched. With a swift shot from his gun, Mazimba wounded the leopard, but it pounced on him, biting deeply into his shoulder. Ba fought back bravely, managing to shoot again and finally killed the leopard, but not before it left him bleeding and weak, barely able to move. As the forest grows quiet again. When the other hunters heard his gunshot and thundered scream, "It's a leopard. I shot it, I shot the leopard." Arrived, they found Mazimba lying next to the dead leopard. His face was pale, and his body was weak from the blood loss, but he managed to raise his hand in victory. The hunters quickly lifted him up, carrying him and the leopard back to the village. As they entered the village square, the villagers gathered around, whispering in awe. The king and elders were already present, waiting to hear the news of the leopard's death. As he was carried back to the village square, Ba whispered that he was happy to die a hero for his people. With his last breath, he raised his hand, which signified he was the hero that slayed the leopard. He passed away as the Obuagu one. In another act of bravery, Mazi Owabonkone and his wife volunteered their newborn child for the sacrifice, understanding that the child's blood was essential to save the village. With the necessary items gathered, the people of Amazu completed the sacrifices, appeasing the gods and ending the curse that had caused so many deaths. Mazimba was immortalized as Obuagu I, the leopard slayer, and Mazi Owa's child was also honored as a symbol of sacrifice and survival. Many years later, Igu was crowned king of Amazu. In a grand ceremony, he integrated the families of Mazimba and Mazi Owa into the royal dynasty and raised statues of both Mba and the infant at the village square. These statues stood as a reminder of the great sacrifices made to save the kingdom and the long life that had returned to Amazu. The statues stood there from generation to generation. Now serve as tourism sites for people who travel from far and wide. Due to their historic antecedents.